tweet that we're live, just to make sure that people know that we're actually live, because time zones are hard, like somebody just said in chat. Make sure we're actually live, because I don't want to. I have this fear of like clicking the wrong button, and then it turns out we weren't live, and then I talk to somebody for an hour. I mean, worse things can happen, but like it'd be a shame for these
That
conversations not to be
recently
live
happened
streamed.
to me.
Yeah.
I was talking to Henry, the Babel maintainer, and we had like this actually great conversation for like an hour plus. And then he just messaged me after like nothing was recording.
Damn. Yeah, that's
I
exactly what
know,
I'm
it was
trying to avoid.
heartbreaking. Yeah,
No, but I think we're
heartbreaking. So
good.
definitely,
So
yeah.
I'm just gonna go ahead with the intro. Welcome to chat number whatever this is. I don't really keep track, as you all know. This is another chat with Max. Today I have Fred here, the creator of Snowpack, which is what we're mainly going to be focusing on today. But Fred, why don't you introduce yourself and tell our viewers who you are, what you do, where you work, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me. I'm so cautious. How official do I go with it? Thanks for having me on, or are we just like having like a chat? Like, oh yeah, we do this every week.
Yeah, it's just a chat.
um,
No, we don't need to be formal at all.
Thanks for having me on your very cool live stream. Yeah, my name's Fred Schott. I work on a project called Snowpack, which is a part of this kind of larger open source project called Pika, which really is just me getting to try a bunch of stuff and see what people like. But Snowpack's really cool. We just had a big launch this week, which I'm sure is something top of mind, worth talking about. Um, as I work on the docs in real time, this might even be one of the better resources for what we're doing. So perfect timing. But yeah, excited to be on, excited to chat.
Nice. So do you work on Pika and Snowpack full time? Is that sort of like your job? How did that come about?
Yeah. So let's see. I mean, the full story goes back to I was at Google in 2015, working on Chrome as a part of the Polymer team, and that was when ESM as this technology is this it's like the import export statement in JavaScript. This ability to like essentially let JavaScript itself load your code for you, instead of having those ship require calls and all these different things. Essentially, letting the browser do a ton of work. It was this really cool technology that at the time was just getting specced out and then like debated, and then this is way before Node ever even considered adding support. This is early days. We got a chance on the Polymer team to like see how we could build Polymer with that. So using that instead of HTML imports, which was this other thing we were playing around with. I basically got to see how cool this technology was very early. So I'm very lucky. Ended up working on it through Polymer, ended up leaving Google to join Ripple. That's where kind of Pika started as this open source project. Just in my free time, what little I had, just throwing things together. It started like version 1 was just the fact that you couldn't find this more modern code on NPM. Like it was a catalog, it had like 50,000 packages. It was like really rink-a-dink, like Craigslist for like web developers for finding packages. It was I had never gotten so many design criticisms out of the gate of just like, not only like, oh yeah, you should fix this, like this design gave me a headache to look at. But from there, I've just been working on it since then. So, a year plus now, building different open source stuff, working on it full time now, really trying to build out not just the open source stuff, but also some cool stuff on the CDN side of things as well.
Nice. So did you raise any money for this? How do you sustain your life, or did you have savings?
A lot of consulting.
Yeah,
So
right.
last year I did it full time with. Luckily, I was able to essentially consult with the company I was leaving, so that really helped. But yeah, looking to build a business out of the CDN. So raising money, doing that whole thing. Yeah, it's been an interesting time for that with everything going on.
Yeah, I can imagine. Nice. So does the paid product exist yet, or is it still just all open source and you're not
Yeah, still all
live
open
with that
source.
yet?
Snowpack's really like the biggest thing we have to show for it. The CDN's really cool, but it's an experiment today, essentially. So you can use it. It's essentially like unpackaged, but like really built for this ESM use case. It's really awesome, but still in progress.
Yeah, right. Makes sense. So what is Pika and what is Snowpack and how do they relate, and what does that world mean in general?
Yeah, good question. I don't even really know myself. Pika is very much just this like an umbrella. It was like the open source thing. Originally, I started like 5 different projects within it, and like everyone got confused by which was which. They all had these like really vague names, like Pika Web, Pika Pack, and in my mind, I'm like, oh, this is cool. This is like I'm like the Apple of open source, right? Like just pencil notes. But as a small open source project, that didn't really get me very far. So Snowpack was really me pulling the most promising part of that, kind of out of the umbrella and giving it its own kind of focus, its own. You don't need to know what Pika is or how it fits in. It's its own thing. It helps you build web apps. It's really fast, and that's where we are today. That's really our biggest kind of focus right now on the open source side of things.
Makes sense. So, in a way, Pika is sort of the lower level tooling, if I got that correctly.
I mean, even to call it that, I think is being very generous to how connected I'm thinking about these things. It's really like, um, you can think of it. I mean, again, because I'm raising money, so this feels very apt. It's like Zeit has Next.js.
Yeah.
Pika has Snowpack. It's this like open source project. It matters a lot to how we see the web growing, and but it's like totally separate in terms of it's not connected to much else within Pika. It's just the thing we care about a lot as an open source project.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. Okay, so what is Snowpack then? What does it do? Why is it cool?
Yeah,
Why are you working on this?
yeah. This has been a long time coming. We had the first release. I mean, again, like there was a Pico web project that confused everyone, naming, bad documentation. That was probably a year ago, so it's been kind of baking for a while. But early January was when I kind of pulled that out of the umbrella, gave it the Snowpack name, gave it a V1 release, and really what that was really trying to simplify everything that we're doing into this really simple value proposition, which was if we can give you npm packages that will run natively in your browser, so like literally your browser can just like import React, you all of a sudden, that's really the last thing we're using bundlers like Webpack, Parcel, Rollup. That's the last thing we need to use them for. So the thinking was today we're using them because essentially we need to import React, and then the bundler goes and it pulls. React is a few tens, hundreds. I can't remember the full number, but that ecosystem, right? You're pulling multiple files. The browser needs a way to load all of those. ESM is native browser loading essentially, so we can actually really leverage that ability that the browser now has to instead of having a bundler do all this work, you can just let the browser do the work for you. So you actually ship to the browser, import React from this place that we as Snowpack have installed it, and the browser just loads it. So now you don't need a bundler. You don't need all the work a bundler does, and you can build apps. And that was like essentially like that was how far we got. Like get rid of that requirement. You can do a lot of cool stuff. It's an open green field. We can't wait to see what happens. That was really the first, I'd say, 4 months of this project, was just getting to that point. Now this new release is essentially tackling the next question, which is, okay, I have dependencies, but like, how do I build an application? Like I'm so used to running npm start and it runs Webpack dev server. Like by being so focused on the dependencies, we were really kind of agnostic about how you built your application, which was good, but also like not super user friendly. We essentially said, go bring these tools individually, and we're not giving you any guidance on how to set you up for success there.
Yeah, right.
So Snowpack V2 is really about like filling out that circle. We have this ability that kind of really changes how you can build things, and now we have the dev server and the build workflow that to actually simplify that for you, actually kind of fulfill the promise that we said is now possible.
So as of V2, Snowpack is a basically fully featured app environment, if I'm understanding that correctly. You can use Snowpack to build your app, and you don't need anything else, right?
Yeah, it does three things. It installs your dependencies. So think of it like an npm install PostScript. It takes the dependencies that you've installed from npm and essentially wraps them up into single files. So React becomes react.js, and the browser can load it successfully. It has a dev server that then basically just lets you host your application as you're writing it. And because we're not doing this bundling, this whole promise that we've made, it starts up in like 20 milliseconds on my machine. Changes are reflected instantly because you're making a change to one file. So it's really fast. It updates really quickly. And then the build command is the last one, which essentially takes that really modern environment, but then still does all the bundling that you'd expect for a production release. So we're not saying you have to throw out sort of what is a very good production optimization. You can keep using a bundler for production, but in development you get this really fast iteration.
Super interesting. So I have a lot of questions about this. The first thing that came to my mind was that I don't want to load thousands of files individually, right? Which you're saying is not what happens because you're bundling each module sort of into its own, each package, I guess, into its own file. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a back and forth where you're doing local development, so things move really quick, right? It's like a couple milliseconds to load something over the wire. But the browser, at the end of the day, can't load thousands of files. Like the overhead alone would, even on a local environment, kill you. We take the kind of middle ground there where, yeah, exactly. Every dependency becomes a single file. So that waterfall is only as deep as your source code. Your source code stays individual files. The dependencies become bundled kind of single files.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
so we walk the line in between the two, right? Where it's pretty hard to build an application yourself in local development that would really become that heavy in terms of the waterfall itself. You're essentially trying to build the shortest chain possible. You can get a pretty long chain, and in local development, it spins up pretty quick.
Yeah, that makes
Um,
sense.
and then the dependencies are really where that problem is introduced, where a dependency can do whatever it wants, and that's where you run into that problem. So that's really the single file. It's as much a solution to this kind of limitation, a technical limitation, giving you a single file that can run in the browser, and then we do that because it makes it fast as well.
Yeah, right, right. So in development mode, it's almost like, um, do you do like hub module reloading or anything like that, or is it just all because it's all individual files? Do you just swap out the files? Like, is that a dumb question?
No, no, no. That's yeah. I mean, that is what is so interesting about this is all of these things that you needed in a like really heavy dev environment all of a sudden become like way more gray, or at least bring it in if you want it. So when you have a server that it updates instantly and it can refresh pretty quickly because everything's cached and serving locally, that instant refresh, even without hot module reloading, is pretty quick. Really, there's like all of the tooling that we built up, source maps to dig into these giant bundles, that like error page that you get with Create React app that you like have to click it and then it tries to open your editor. Like you realize that all of this expensive coding we've done and tooling, um, it's all kind of up for debate again now that you just have a much quicker, lighter dev environment. So we don't do hot module reloading now. We definitely want to, but that kind of drop in hot module HMR really is like pretty framework dependent. So we'd have to start thinking about like what does React HMR look
Yeah,
like
right.
versus Vue HMR. But yeah, that's something that we really want to look into. But it's just we haven't needed it yet. And we built some pretty big apps with it already.
Yeah, nice. So you're using Snowpack for development, and then in production, it still bundles, as far as I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah. There's a
Does
build command just like Webpack or anything else that bundles that app up for you.
so does that use like a custom thing, or is that using Webpack or Parcel or one of
No,
those
I
other things, or
I can
Rollup?
I very much like stand on the shoulders of giants on this project. It uses Rollup to handle the actual installing of your packages. So we get a lot from the Rollup team. That's been an awesome tool. And then Parcel is actually the bundler. So Parcel fits in really nicely. If you've heard of it, it's like this Webpack, but like really holistically about bundling apps, not just JavaScript.
Yeah.
And because we're doing this build in development, where we essentially take all of your files and build them into something that can be served really quickly in development, we're actually doing the work up front to build, Svelte into JavaScript, Vue into JavaScript, JSX into JavaScript. When Parcel sees your app, it's all CSS, JavaScript, HTML. So you don't actually need all the configuration that you would normally need for a bundler, because you're trying to like transform your custom thing and bundle it at the same time. We kind of split those two concerns. You're building at development time, and then you're just bundling really generic, kind of well-known web native app code. So Parcel gets a lot out of that without any customization.
Interesting, interesting. Andrew just asked a great question in chat, which is what are the limitations in this approach? Like, what's the bad thing about doing this? I guess if you want to phrase it a
Yeah,
little bit more spicily.
right, right. What's the catch, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
there's got to be a catch. There's a couple. So I'd say the biggest one, kind of overall on this thing, is that like what we're looking at here is kind of day one, year one of this type of development. So I've been working on it as hard as I have, because it's like this. I see this as like, why would we do anything else, right? If you could offer the exact same app at the end of the day, the exact same performance story at the end of the day, but during development you get just instantly quicker. It starts up in so fast, and it responds so quick to changes. Why wouldn't we do development like that? But the caveat there is we have been doing development in a certain way for like 10 years now. Like we are looking at Webpack, way into its kind of it's well supported, it's well documented. It's they have all this funding from Open Collective. They can support. That's a very mature product. This is a very immature one.
Yeah, right.
As I was working on it last night and just pushed some changes. Like it's moving quick. So I'd say the biggest one is just this is like day one of a new way of doing things, and we very much think this is how we'll be doing it. How everyone will be doing it in a couple of years, but it's day one, or it's year one at least.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So, uh, this approach almost doesn't make bundlers obsolete because you're still bundling in production. So you're really focused on the development environment here. You're really saying Snowpack is the best way to develop an application for the web. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Just to sort of
Yeah. Yeah, Devin, I think is how you pronounce his name, but the creator of Parcel and I have had great conversations about this because it's like bundling less doesn't mean like bundlers are bad. And I think that's my fault. Like the early iterations of this project messaging, like the way I like talked about it in blog posts was like, we're gonna kill the bundler, bundling bad, rah. Like I was like half trolling, half like putting on this like villainous, like trying to connect this message, that like we're doing way more than we need to at development. And everything is way complicated. Like at my old company, you'd hit npm start and it would take a minute to start up this dev server. Like, it's just like this feeling of like there's got to be a better way. There's still bundling is a great production optimization, right? You're getting things into less requests. You're reducing that waterfall even more. Your compression's able to kind of better compress larger files. That's all still well and good. So this is not a zero bundling future. But if you go back past before we had Webpack and before we had Browserify, bundling was really a production optimization. We would have these dev environments that really reflected what Snowpack does, where your individual files are loaded in the browser, and then it was more called concatenating at the time because tooling was pretty naive. But you'd essentially just concatenate all these files together into one. That was your production optimization, and that's really what we're talking about here.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's almost like because from my sort of image of what Snowpack is, I thought it sort of didn't bundle at all. But now that it bundles in production, that basically means you can do things like transpile JavaScript back to ES5, right, and support all the browsers. Is that something you do,
Yeah.
Or does it like require users to have modern browsers as well?
Yeah. So the only requirement there, which I don't think affects anyone, but you asked what are other catches. Like this could be another catch for some people. You just need a modern browser for development.
Oh yeah.
So really and even that's pretty modern in that case is really just anything that supports ESM, which is I think every browser released since 2018. Maybe UC browser, but that's mobile. So
yeah,
Firefox, Chrome, anything released in the last 2 years is modern enough to run your application. It's pretty straightforward. So that's your dev environment. You bring a modern browser, we give you a modern dev environment, and then those kind of heavier tools like transpiling something to run on an older browser or IE11 even, that becomes a production only task. So heavy things get pushed to like this kind of one-time thing on every deployment you run it versus every save you're hitting these much heavier code paths.
Makes a ton of sense. That's very cool. Giuseppe asked in chat, what kind of control do you have on the bundling for production? The sort of can you register Parcel plugins or something? Can you change I guess you're using Babel or something to transpile the JavaScript. Can you change like their configurations and stuff?
So we're trying not to if we can. Although like again, it's day one, so it's like we're kind of waiting for the right use case to come along to have that conversation. But right now we don't. The idea is that you're customizing your build at the dev time. So we have this idea, essentially our take on like a bundler plugin or this whole ecosystem of Webpack configuration, bundler configuration. Essentially this idea of piping your source files through sort of like these one-line transforms out into your application. So let's say you have a application you've written in JSX. And actually, let's even say it's TypeScript. So it's TSX, it's TypeScript and a little bit of JSX. You're building something with React. This is something that you would need a little bit of tooling to build. What you do in Snowpack, versus this traditional in Webpack, you'd have a bunch of plugins that kind of all handle different things, different parts of that, and you have to bring them all into this one platform, essentially like morph them into something that fits into a bundler's idea of a plugin. That usually ends up being pretty complex. What we're able to do is essentially, for each kind of tool, you can essentially just plug in a CLI command, like a bash command. So think of it like every time you tell Snowpack, every time I see a TSX file, I want to pipe it through Babel. So that like really complex bundler configuration just becomes this one line, essentially like a CLI command. It's literally using like a CLI, like a bash command, piping the file contents in through input, and then like piping out the output of that bash command. So we take the whole complex world of configuration and bring it back into something that looks a lot like package JSON scripts, if you've seen those, and where you can like do npm run build this or npm run test. It's really similar. It's like npm run build my app, and everything is just one kind of linear line. So you can plug in the building, you can plug in a linter, essentially saying like every time I want to lint my project, run TSX, like run the actual TypeScript compiler. And it all plugs into this dev environment. So you get that feedback in a single CLI interface, a single build tool.
Yeah, right. So because you're then configuring the dev environment, which sort of takes care of the transpiling to sort of JavaScript, all the bundler really needs to do at the end of the day is take all those JavaScript files and turn them
Yeah,
into like
right.
code script
I kind of went
bundles.
on a tangent there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. No, no,
yeah.
no.
At
That
the end of the
that that
day,
would that
yeah,
was a great tangent, which means you're configuring Snowpack, right, the dev environment, which means you shouldn't really need to configure the bundler because that doesn't do anything anymore, right? All it does
yeah,
is sort of combine all like this large list of individual JavaScript files into optimized bundles for production.
yeah, exactly. You're already building your application at dev time into something that will run in the browser. So that's the heavy lifting is like all the custom things are done there, and bundlers are actually pretty good at understanding JavaScript, CSS, HTML, SVGs. Parcel has pretty native support in.
That's pretty sweet. So how much faster is this in development? Can you show us some kind of demo maybe
Yeah,
of how this works and what it actually looks like when using this?
yeah, for sure. Give me 1 second. Do screen shares work on this?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
this
yeah, yeah,
gonna
yeah, for sure.
beautiful? Give me 1 second, man.
Yeah, yeah, no stress. It's really cool. I actually really like this idea because I was thinking it can't be that fast to load all like thousands of JavaScript files, but you're not loading thousands of JavaScript files. You're still bundling for production, and then even in development, you're
Yeah,
loading just the files for your page, I assume, because it's imports, right? So it just resolves all the
yeah.
imports of the page. How many JavaScript files does a page really have? You know what I mean? Like it's not that
Right.
much.
And you load them on demand, right? So what a bundler has to do is as your file grows and as your project grows and grows and grows, it's really getting that like holistic view at start time, at dev time. So it like performance doesn't scale with project size, I've found with bundlers. But this, you're loading the files as you need them. So whatever slice you're looking at, you're only ever spending the cost of loading up those files on that page. So page one, page two, page 100, whichever one you go to, it's only loading the needed files on that page.
Makes sense.
Let me yeah, so we shipped this create Snowpack app. Let me see. Can you see my screen all right?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
Beautiful.
Um, thank you. Oh man, if you think I didn't just clear, like this desktop is full of everything that was cluttering my, it is never this clean. I promise you.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I essentially, let me see if I can just, I did a little bit of, so we have this create Snowpack app. This is the easiest way to get started with it today. Feels really similar to create React app, but again, we're not like React or Vue or anything specific. We're very much like we are a dev environment. Bring your framework. We work with everything. So we have a React template. We have a Vue, Svelte, a React plus TypeScript. Do you have any choice? Any favorite?
Well, React clearly.
Let's do it. TypeScript or no? I don't want to set off
I mean, if you want to do TypeScript,
a
I'd love to
war.
see TypeScript too, because that's a little bit more complex.
Let's do it. Okay, so we're going to create it in this new dir. And it's just going to be nested inside another dir called new dir. So hopefully that's fine.
Or whatever.
Yeah, it's fine. What this does is essentially, we're definitely inspired by Create React app here. We take the template that we own, that we essentially maintain as this kind of like well set up dev environment. We create a new directory, we install it into there, we install your dependencies, and then you just get, at the end of the day, a folder that is, an initialized repository ready to go. And inside of that, a lot of the scripts, similar to Create React app, are managed for you. So we can push updates to these scripts, especially now as we're moving through this beta period into a 2.0. We can essentially update your dev environment for you. We own the tooling, we own the kind of the basic setup without totally locking you in again, because the tools are pretty simple. What Create React app gets stuck on is the fact that there's so much complexity going on. They say don't even we won't even support a custom Babel plugin or interface.
Yeah.
They lock everything down because any chance of you introducing a new plugin or new behavior, it's pulling a card out of the house of cards or a Jenga piece out of the Jenga tower. That would be a maintenance nightmare for them. So rightfully they say not to. But because everything here is a little simpler, a little more linear, we can actually be a lot more flexible in letting you bring your own Babel config, bring new tooling into the place. Each build is essentially scoped to its own file extension, file type. So you introducing something to help you build your CSS doesn't really impact how we look at your JavaScript or your TypeScript.
Yeah, right. Makes sense.
Okay. All this did was run npm install in this new directory. It ran Snowpack install, which I'll show you in a second. But really what this does is install your dependencies. So it's taking these dependencies that live in your node modules folder and installing them to this new directory called web modules. So React, React DOM, and then we have this CSC styling package that we use. Okay, looks like it was successful. You have some commands here. Again, this should feel very familiar if you've ever used Create React App. Pretty similar stuff. Let me even just open up a VS Code instance. I'll zoom in a little bit too. I'm so used to presenting whenever I screen share, like from people far away. So it's first thing I always do is make this like
as big as
not
possible.
at all. Yeah, not at all a normal amount of size. Okay. Yeah, so this should feel like a pretty familiar dev environment. We can check out the package JSON.
Yeah.
So we have your prepare script. That's your essentially installing your dependencies. Start runs the build command. Start runs the dev command, which is your dev environment. Build runs the build command, which bundles it. And we ship these templates with Jest built in.
Hold on, but then there's a thing there that's not very standard. It says
yes.
web dependencies.
Web
what is that?
dependencies. Let's get back to that, actually, honestly, because
right.
that is, I'd say,
fair enough.
maybe more of a future direction, but it is really cool. Don't let me forget that. I'm not trying to hide it. Yeah, I'm moving your screen around. So yeah, again, we get to basically give you these things that you can extend your config from. There's a TypeScript config that you can extend from, Snowpack config. So we provide a lot of this stuff out of the box, but really easy for you to build on top of it. So this install types helps you work with TypeScript a little bit better. Application, again, it looks pretty straightforward. We're doing some stuff here that is very bundler-esque, right? So importing CSS and importing SVG, if you ship this directly to the browser would say, that's not JavaScript, hold on, and it would essentially fail. We do some things to essentially give you the conveniences of a bundled development, which I'll show you if you're interested in like how that works. It's interesting. Sure. But yeah, okay, so we have an app here. It's TypeScript. You can see a little interface. All pretty standard stuff.
Yeah.
Let's run our dev environment. So npm start. Oh, so it's going a little slower than normal because we're on this call, but server started in less than 30 milliseconds. Normally that's down to like 9.
That is insane.
Yeah.
That is already
so
insane.
Again, a minute at my old company was what we spent waiting for this. Similar offering essentially.
And also at the same time, this is obviously a much smaller app, I hope, than you were working on at work. But really, because of how this works, I assume it scales relatively well because it doesn't do much, and then what it does is really specific to the page, or does it do everything at once, right?
That startup time is totally decoupled from the size of your app.
Damn.
Because server startup, right? It's just starting the server. It's saying, okay, I'm ready to receive requests. It loads up the browser window, and then that browser window is what triggers essentially building of your app as it loads. So this came back pretty quick. This is the create Snowpack app kind of React template. So it's everything that you were building. Essentially what this output is, I'll go through this really quick. What we've configured in those build scripts that I mentioned earlier, we're essentially configuring a few things that describe your app. So, and even I can just pull this out, have this right kind of next to each other here so you can see.
Mm-hmm.
So we're saying that we're going to mount the public directory as kind of your main application. So index.html here becomes root index.html. We're mounting web modules so that you can load these things that Peek has installed, right? There's React.js is essentially this React, React DOM. It's these single files that we've built for you as a part of our install step. And we're mounting your source directory. I think we mounted to a like dist directory, so you can kind of rename as well as you mount. And then we're saying, okay, run TypeScript to lint. So if we go and make a change, let's say that we this should break, and I hit save. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So you instantly got that feedback, and you see a little error there. And the browser, all it had to do was build that one file and refresh the page for you. So again, there's no waiting for kind of a rebuilding of multiple chunks, multiple things. Again, I think my computer's having a little trouble. Again, it even goes faster than this, but
right, because you're not bundling, You really
Yeah.
only have to change that one file.
Yeah. Again, so these things that we're doing, they scale to a project of any size because at the end of the day, you're not hitting save, pulling different files together, building out that like that chunk that your bundler has created. It's a single file. So
Yeah, and it doesn't even matter how many files you have because, again, like you said, it's not bundling a ton of files. It's just changing that one file that was changed literally and then refreshing the browser.
yep. And so with HMR, this would be even faster, right? It would update that and then
Yeah,
actually
of
literally
course,
it would
of course.
page update it.
But that's like
Um,
even this is so much faster that HMR is like a minor enhancement, no longer a necessity.
right. Everything else, exactly. Like everything is on the table now in terms of do I really need that?
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah. Like
not.
HMR is still useful, I guess, specifically if we're talking about
Yeah.
HMR, just because of the state persistence and whatever. But in terms of just reloading quickly, this is so much faster that it doesn't really matter anymore, right? Like
Yeah.
if I don't need to keep any state, I don't need HMR anymore. It doesn't get me
100%.
anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool. um, yeah. So I think I mentioned the source directory. It's kind of mounted here in the dist kind of URL. So that's where we're loading our index from. Um, here's where, so it's done the JSX transformation, right? We've essentially told it, I think those are the last few
Mm,
things here. We give it some build scripts, which I can even show you. Again, they're linear, they're one line, so they're pretty straightforward. It's in that config. It's actually in the config that we extend. But let me see, what's the best way to, we can just write it ourselves, honestly, because you can extend all this, right?
yeah, yeah, right.
Essentially what we're saying, I'll just copy it in here. We're saying that for every TypeScript, TSX, JS, JSX, I want to run Babel. And that is like the Babel CLI. I think for this, we need to give it a file name.
Yeah,
So this is something that we document on the site, but essentially you can pass in these variables to represent something that a CLI might need, like a file name.
yeah,
Babel, I
yeah.
think,
Sure.
uses that to,
So it's literally like a npm script, except it's run by Snowpack on every
yeah,
file
you
that is
could run
left.
this on the command line and a replacing file with the actual thing that we're paying. And you could recreate this, manually file by file if you wanted to. It's
Damn.
a bash script at the end of the day.
Yeah. My first thought when I heard that was that's gotta be really slow because when you're building many files, you want to build them like you want to put all your files into Babel because then they can optimize. But you're only ever rebuilding one file. It doesn't even matter
Yeah.
because
So
every file is rebuilt on its own, so that doesn't even matter. I just now
yeah,
realized.
it matters a bit if the tool is really slow. So Babel CLI, it does a lot. It loads. It has a lot of complex configuration loading. So the CLI is actually not as streamlined as some other tools that we played around with. But that's where you can start to kind of play. Okay, do I want to bring a plugin interface, something more kind of native JavaScript that actually runs a function versus starting up a CLI?
Yeah, but
Yeah, you can get really far.
even then in development at least, maybe in production is different, but in development at least, if I'm changing one file, even Babel, if it's very slow, is not going to take that long to change that one file. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? And
yeah.
it doesn't. You don't need to do anything else. It's just that one file you changed.
Yeah, we're still talking about like hundreds of milliseconds, and that's the kind of worst
Worst
case that
case
we've seen so
scenario.
far.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Woo!
I know it's cool,
This is a
and
very different
so
way of
this
thinking
is
about things.
yeah, it's pretty wild. This is the result that comes out of that. So really, this is just we've piped it through Babel. This was the result of the CLI. What we also did here was the Snowpack itself takes care of your imports. So this is not a Babel thing. This is a Snowpack thing. For any JavaScript that gets built, we actually run a scanner on the imports and we rewrite them if needed. So what you saw in the code there was import React,
Yeah, just like you used to.
or actually, I think this is the file we're looking at right now.
Yeah, yeah. But
React
same.
DOM. So we rewrite that to point to, again, this is an actual hosted JavaScript file that you can see here. You can see here. So that's part one, right? That's the magic of all this, is that you don't need the bundler anymore because of this exact solution. App.js, and then what we do is we add this kind of ESM proxy flag. This is a dev time only kind of thing to anything that isn't JavaScript. So I think I mentioned earlier, right? You load JavaScript, it works fine. You load anything else like I won't play around with it, but you couldn't do CSS normally.
Yeah, yeah. Of course.
What
Yeah.
this tells our dev server is that anything with this flag should actually be returned as JSS. As JavaScript. So we're actually doing something a little sneaky here, which is that the browser doesn't actually care about the file extension. It cares about what the server is telling it this file is.
Yeah, of course.
So it goes and loads this app.css, and you can see in the response,
You
even though it
say
ends with CSS,
It's
We're
application
telling it it's
JavaScript, of
JavaScript.
course, because the
We're
browser
actually
doesn't
sending
care.
back JavaScript. Yeah. So what we essentially do is that this is essentially a JavaScript
Oh,
wrapper
I
for a CSS
see.
file. And it just takes the contents of your
Oh,
CSS. Again, if you're using post CSS or Sass, it uses the built asset, but it wraps it in a JavaScript. This is what bundlers are really doing today, but in this really complex kind of bundling foundation, what we're doing is we're splitting it apart into its own request.
yeah, I see, I see. This is similar to what, for example, the style loader would be doing in Webpack, right?
Yeah,
Turning each CSS file into one of these JavaScript snippets, except it does that in the context of building an entire bundle, where you're sort of like doing it on the fly for every single file that's requested.
yeah,
If I understand that correctly.
yeah. Again, because it's dev time, these things they load over the wire over your local network.
Yeah.
So you can load multiple files and it loads pretty snappy. Same thing here for something that isn't CSS. So this is just an SVG. I think our application loads it. So this is something, again, this is pretty popular in Webpack and bundled apps. This idea of, I want just a reference to this file at build time. I want to know where this thing will load, not just at dev, but like, where whenever I ship this app, this is essentially me getting a URL that I can then, I think what we do with it is we just put it in as the actual like image source. Yeah, so
Yeah, right.
wherever this logo is, give me the actual URL out as the logo variable. And what we do there, so if it's not CSS, if it's anything else, we give you back the current URL. So a really simple transform.
That makes sense. But
So the
then
default actual export.
even there, you could configure Snowpack with this sort of scripts like interface to turn that SVG and pipe it through whatever, some kind of SVG OMG optimizer, right? In theory.
Yeah. Yeah. So it still ends up loading that SVG at
Yeah,
the end of
right.
the day. So yeah, you could pass in a minifier. Like the CSS is a great example. This content is been built. It's been built by whatever the response would have been, and you can load the original response just by removing that. So CSS as JavaScript, CSS as CSS.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. But of course, the reason you have to do that transformation is because you're loading this file from the server via an import in JavaScript, and the browser doesn't understand
Yeah.
that. And so you're turning
Yeah.
that dynamically into a JavaScript file, which you then send down, which sort of has just the CSS in a JavaScript snippet that injects it into the DOM.
Yeah, exactly. This is a fairly recent addition because what we were trying to do was actually like dynamically add a style or like a link element to go and just load it. So before we had this like ESM proxy idea, the problem there is that then you've now decoupled the loading of the CSS from the loading of the JavaScript. So the JavaScript app won't wait for that
Yeah,
CSS
right.
to dynamically load. It'll just be like,
Yeah.
oh, great, I can start. So you got this weird flash of content at dev time.
Yeah, that makes
We
sense.
just recently fixed that.
That makes sense. That's nice. There's a great question in chat, which I'm not sure I fully understand because I'm not an expert on bundlers, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Mailcar asked, does this have the danger of changing the semantics of your app's loading behavior? For example, browsers implemented imports following the chain down is different from a bundle that imports from an AMD module in the same file. Would you consider the difference in that behavior between dev and production a risk?
I might have lost the question at AMD file in the same bundle,
Yeah, I
but
don't understand that. I don't understand that part of the
but
question.
I think I know. I mean, the general question, right, is I think getting at this concern, which is, I understand completely, of I am now developing an environment that looks different from my production environment. And that's always been the case to an extent, right? Create React app. Most bundlers, they have a production config and a dev config. So that's not a new idea, but it's very explicit now. This is a unbundled dev environment with a bundled production build pipeline. That's not a new idea. Again, this goes back to essentially the way at least I was doing professional web development before Webpack and Browserify. The idea of a production only optimization like this isn't new, but it certainly just introduces that different environment. What bundlers do at the end of the day is they try and recreate this, but optimized. So a bundler, if it ever takes an application and actually changes it for the worse, that's kind of a bundler bug. So bundlers are pretty good at fixing those things, and their job at the end of the day is to optimize, not to change behavior.
Yeah. That makes sense. Mailcar just clarified that he meant browser imports are different from imports that are created by a bundler that creates
Yes,
AMD modules
yes.
in your bundle.
So I can show you even like let's just build it, and then you all can see.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Oh yeah, that's a great idea actually.
So it looks really similar, but it's actually running through these things linearly now, and running the linter also in parallel, so you get lint feedback as well as a part of your build. File by file, building them, and then at the end you see that bundle star. It's essentially just saying at the end we're going to bundle it. So again, we're really leaning into this idea of like linear build scripts, everything linear. Just again, the nest of configuration when you get into a kind of more complex plugin ecosystem has always scared me. So trying to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah.
And so yeah, this is Parcel under the hood. We're really not doing much on top of it. And Parcel's got a V2 coming out that's very exciting, so that's even going to help this more. But now I'm just going to use a static file server. Well, first let's just see it. Right, so here's the bundled output. Here's your build directory.
Yeah.
It has those rewriting, those disks, source to disk. But these are actually now the bundled things.
Yeah. So this
And
is
also,
really familiar to anybody who's ever looked at a bundler's output, right? Like if you've ever
yeah,
used Create React app and looked at your dist or build folder, this is what it looks like, right? This is really the same
yeah,
thing.
yeah. These are all, your entire application in this example has been bundled into a single JavaScript
Yeah,
file.
because it's just
All of your CSS is now a single CSS file.
yeah, it's just using a bundler, so the result
Yeah.
is kind of the same, right?
Totally. So now we can serve that. This is just a static asset server. So it literally just pipes files from disk. It uses the same port, so we should be okay. And super anticlimactic, but it's the same app.
Yeah, of course. But this
I
is
know
not
this,
the production build, right?
yeah.
Which
So
ties
if we
actually into a
reopen,
question that Giuseppe asked before, where he asked, "Are you bundling for process.env.node equals production when in development mode?"
yeah, that's a great question. I'd actually have to check. I believe we're treating it as development during development, just because a lot of frameworks will have, a lot of dependencies will have different
Yeah, that
kind
makes
of
sense.
debugging tools that are flagged on and off based on that. But I can double check. Yeah, at the end of the day, everything now is single file. So in production, this would have loaded, very quickly.
Yeah, and so I assume
There was
Parcel
no
also
concern of
does
a
like
waterfall.
I assume Parcel also does like code splitting and all of that fancy jazz. So you
Yep.
get basically all the benefits of Parcel in production. But then really what Snowpack is focused on here is the development environment and making that as smooth as possible, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sure at some point we will have more control over this output. But the nice thing about Parcel is its whole pitch is like zero config. Like we will make these code splitting, bundling decisions for you. We'll optimize it as much as we can for you. So we're standing on the shoulders of some pretty great projects here.
Makes a lot of sense. So um I want to know what web modules is. I keep seeing web modules and I can't.
Oh yeah, and we talked about web dependencies too.
Yeah, and I can't ignore it. How does that work?
Okay.
What is this?
Okay, so let me clear this out, and I'll just. Okay, so again, we have this. It got kind of lost in the create Snowpack app output, so I'll just do this again. This prepare script. It's essentially just like npm run prepare. That's just going to run the default. This is the thing that we've been doing since forever. This is like kind of the core of the project, is this idea of installing your dependencies for you in a way that they can be loaded in the browser. So what we've done here is we've taken your React, we've taken your React DOM, and we've taken them from a node modules where they're really raw, they're really raw source code, and they're now installed into a web modules directory, which I think I showed. Yeah, I more or less showed this, but essentially you get, this is the code of the package saved there. We've done some bundling. So at first I thought this felt a little hypocritical. I felt kind of bad, right? We are actually bundling these dependencies. So we're like, a bundler, that means you don't have to use a bundler. It's a weird message, but really what we're doing is we're taking the bundling concept and we're just moving it away from dev time and into the install time.
Yeah,
stuff.
that makes a lot of sense actually.
So again, one time versus on every save costs. This is a one-time cost that you run at install time. So 2.4 seconds installs them.
Because now that you're saying that, it really seems kind of dumb that we're bundling React every single time we change a file in our app.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. Every time you start it up, I think, bundlers do some caching, but at the end of the day, that is files that the bundler is constantly juggling and worrying about as you build.
Yeah. Now that you phrase it that way, that actually sounds pretty dumb. Phrasing. And of course, bundlers do a bunch of smart stuff to make that less of a pain, but really that doesn't make any sense, right? Like you're installing React once and it doesn't change anytime until you install a new version. So why don't you just bundle that when you install it?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense today is our essentially like the whole project message. It definitely made sense maybe even like 3-4 years ago, before there was this native module loading that you could do instead, right? So there was really no alternative. But But now we have a alternative, right? It's native, it's browser, it's the code that we're already writing with this import export statements. So it's like we're pure inertia, really, and like I'm sure there are other reasons, but really we're using old tools that we don't need just because again we're year 10, where really mature tooling has been built to solve these problems, but for a world that had different requirements than we have today.
That makes so much sense. Oh, that makes so much
Uh,
sense. My
so
mind
we
is actually blown because this is actually not that you phrased it that way. That makes so much sense to me. Why are we rebundling React every time? And then of course, 99% of the files in any React app, for example, is probably from dependencies. That's probably an exaggeration, right? It's probably not
no
99%, but it's a large majority, right?
I I think Laurie Voss at npm said like 97% of every project is open source dependency code.
Yeah, right. So you're rebundling 97% every single time, even though they never change. And of course, they're
Yeah,
cached and whatever. And bundlers do a bunch of smart stuff, but why not do that at install time?
yeah. That's the pitch. I need to take what you've said and now put it into a message, because that's exactly it.
No, I mean that makes a ton of sense to me actually.
Yeah. Yeah, it totally changes how you think about web development, where you don't need to just again, it was an old need that everything had to go through a single tool because there was no native loading. um, Now everything can go through the browser can do what it's done for decades now, which is load your assets, prioritize requests. It's a really simple way of thinking about web development that was how we did it originally, and then we kind of strayed away just as npm was such a powerful force, right? It's like, yeah, I used Bower. It's like everyone moved from Bower to npm. It took over the web for good reason. But we lost along the way the simplicity of not just view source, which I think is this kind of like, I don't know. I don't think that anyone's missing the days of really kind of nitty gritty viewing your source. Like, who does that anymore?
Also, you can still do that with source maps, right? That's why we have source maps.
Right,
So
right. But we've
it's not
taken, yeah,
gone.
exactly. Yeah, we've taken that idea though of web development should be simple by default. Um, you shouldn't need a bundler if you have really complex requirements, or you just really like bundlers. Feel free to keep using Webpack, rollup, parcel in development. Right? We're not what I care about a lot is the fact that we've taken away a requirement that I think threw a lot of people off. At least it threw me off a lot as I was learning bundlers. Right? It's To learn web development, you have to be comfortable with a bundler. You have to know that a Webpack config is a thing. You have to maybe debug an issue in your config. These are higher bars to entry than anything I started with. So part of this is like really like, let's move back to simple by default, and then bring in the tools that you need. If you want them during development, feel free.
Yeah, this is kind of blowing my mind actually.
That's awesome. I'm really glad, really happy to hear that. Um, in the web modules folder, there's an import map. This is essentially created by the install step. It's really not necessary. You could point to these things directly if you wanted to, but to keep everything kind of complete and as browser native as we
Yeah,
can, we
yeah,
essentially
sure.
use this to power those rewrites that we do. So I mentioned you can write import React, and then we'll
Yeah, yeah,
rewrite it
right.
to the proper URL. That's being powered by this import map.
Huh. So really,
So
in sort of in my takeaway from this so far is the magic in Snowpack is almost the import rewriting.
yeah, at the
In
end
a
of the
like
day,
that, but only obviously in combination with moving the bundling to the install step of dependencies, right? But those two things in combination is really what makes this entire thing different than anything else. Is
yeah,
that sort of like a
I
fair
think that's
summary?
fair. Yeah, I think the rewriting of the imports is what connects your source code to this world of dependencies that actually just load in the browser. That was the part that was missing in Snowpack v1, where we were like, here they are. And then every developer that we talked to was just like, okay, what do I do now? Um,
Yeah, right. That
the
makes
import
sense.
rewriting is exactly right. It's a connection into that world. It brings your source code and your dependency code together.
That's fascinating. Huh.
I'm so glad you're enjoying this, because it's been an exciting project to work on and see it grow.
Yeah, because I feel like this makes a lot of sense. If like just from a first principles view of looking at this, the way this works makes a lot of sense, and it does seem kind of wasteful the way we do development environments right now. And of
Yeah.
course, Milka rightfully asked, there is a risk of having different behavior in development and production. But really you already have different behavior in development and production, right? Like you're already
Yeah,
doing different
we've
things in
already
the bundler
crossed that
in
threshold.
dev
Yeah,
and production, right? Like you've already crossed that threshold, and they just do a really good job of sort of managing, I guess, that it doesn't differ behavior wise, only output wise, right? And so maybe Snowpack has some work to do there to sort of cover all the edge cases, which is fine because it's, again, like you said, day one of this project. But like other than that, this makes so much more sense than the way we're doing things right now.
yeah, yeah. It's a really really nice way to do development. I mean, so Pika.dev has been using Snowpack for a while now. So that's our catalog. It's a fairly, it's, I'd say, mid-size site. There's a search catalog. It has to go and fetch things and dynamically update. It's powered by React. Um, but yeah, like that's been powered by this for a while now, and it's just like so quick to develop with it. So just kind of like low tooling, things are really snappy. And again, it's only going to get better from there.
So I've actually pulled up the Pika.dev website here. Is this using React or is it just vanilla HTML or something?
So I think the homepage by memory is just kind of like a pretty static site, but there's a search bar at the top, which is our catalog of packages. So essentially, you can think of it like an npm catalog, like npm search on the website, but for
Yeah.
web developers. It's a smaller subset of packages that we can detect are kind of web friendly. They ship ESM. We highlight the size of the actual, like, the bundled impact when you add them to your site.
Yeah, I'm
It's a
looking at
really
that right
convenient
now.
like way to search npm, just because it's like really focused on light packages for web developers.
Huh. I'm looking at the. Sorry,
But
I'm just enjoying this website right now.
yeah, I mean, share your screen, because if you look at the source, I think
Yeah,
everything is, we
I'm kind
ship
of.
it
Oh, sorry.
unbundled.
I showed the stream, but I didn't show you. Hold on.
Oh no, that's fine.
Because the problem is if I share my screen, it's gonna be really small. But we're gonna do that anyway, because otherwise you can't see what I'm doing. That's actually a good point. See, I learned something new today. I want to share Brave browser. That didn't work. That
I
messed
see it now.
everything up. You can see
Okay,
it now, but nobody else can. Okay, we're not doing that again. That didn't work. But
okay.
anyways, it's a nice website. Go to pika.dev. And so this entire website is built with Snowpack and the
It's
development
built with
experiences.
Snowpack, and it goes one step further. It's shipped unbundled. So the build
Oh,
step bundles by default, and I think we've actually like made it like it's default and not configurable, because no one's really asking for it, and it simplifies a lot of things. But we've been kind of really trying to push this idea that you don't need bundling anymore, right? So it would be, we're still a small enough site where we get by without that. We can essentially just build the unbundled assets and skip the bundling step.
is there a place where people can look at the source of this website by any chance, or the sort of source of any app built with Snowpack? It's not really
I'm
that
trying to think of,
different. I guess like
no,
it's not really
it's
that. But I want to like. Is there a way that people can try this,
no,
or
it's
is the
not.
best
So
way
no,
just
the
create
site
Snowpack app?
code is not open source. But you can go to view source, like open up your network tab, and you essentially see those files streaming down. So you can still check it out. It wouldn't be as convenient, but
Makes sense. So really, the best way to start out is to run create Snowpack app, which is really fast
yeah,
anyway, and then you just run
yeah,
Snowpack start or dev.
yeah. And we're adding new templates, as we get closer. So we announced this kind of V2. It's still in beta, looking to like really kind of stamp it next week. So as a part of that, trying to collect as many templates for launch day as we can. So to anyone on the stream, in the chat, if there's a framework that you like, if you want to play around with this, we need all the help we can get. I'm not an expert in most frameworks. I built the React one, and I was like, great, I know this. And then I built the Svelte one, and it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like piling Svelte code. Yeah. So all the help I can get on any of the existing templates or new ones is very appreciated.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Nice. I think this would be a great place to end it. Is there any last things you want to get across?
I now feel personally responsible to say that we didn't talk about the web dependencies thing, which I feel like I came off as I was trying to hide
Oh
that
no.
web dependencies are packaged JSON. So if you want to go over that, I can go
Oh
over it,
yeah,
but it will
actually,
be
yeah.
like a new.
Let's go over that. We've got
Okay.
some more time. I actually want to
I'm quarantined. I don't have anywhere to go.
know. Same.
Yeah, I mean, this, yeah, for your own planning time wise, this, it's not a super quick thing, but cut me off if I go on too deep a tangent.
Yeah. No worries.
Hey, give me 1 second to share again.
I just like implicitly assumed that the web modules were related to web dependencies, I guess, which is why I
So
assumed that
they
question
are,
sort of
the
asked.
end result is totally the same. The process is different. So the idea here is that one of the other kind of big things of feedback that we got was like, this is cool, but why do I have to install my dependencies twice, right? Why do I have to npm install and then Snowpack install? Now I have two copies of my dependencies. This feels strange. This feels weird. This is a solution to that problem, and really kind of, I'd say, hard to say what like a 3.0 release looks like, but I'd say this is once we kind of nail the app building use case. I think this is the direction we want to go next, which is actually managing your dependencies for the front end for you. What that means is that CSC, it's not in dev dependencies, it's not in your regular dependencies. npm actually doesn't install this for you when it goes and runs npm install.
Yeah.
npm installs these, but it doesn't know how to understand this, so it just ignores this. Snowpack knows how to understand this, though. So when you run Snowpack install, what we do is we essentially scan your application code for the imports you use. So the result of all this, right, in this terminal is that we saw your application was using React, it was using React DOM, all well and good. So that's what it installs for you. Web dependencies is this idea that we actually will go and fetch that code for you. So not from your node modules directory, but like from a hosted source like our CDN right now, which is operating these packages and essentially pulling them from source itself versus having to install it locally and then build locally. So that all that work that we're doing to bundle them at install time, that like 2.4 seconds, really we're moving towards a model where we actually just pull these already built JavaScript assets for you. Essentially really becoming an npm install for the front end dependencies. So npm install taking packages and pulling them down into your node modules. In this world, we are taking these already built JavaScript files and just copying them into your web modules directory.
Okay, that makes sense to me because that makes the install much faster. But
yeah, it makes the install much faster, and it just kind of simplifies this idea of what's an npm dependency versus Snowpack dependency, web modules versus node modules.
Yeah. So does
Starting
that
to
work
move
with
all your front end development dependencies to web dependencies?
Does that work with any dependency?
Anything that is built to run on the front end.
And
so
basically, so it works with anything that Snowpack install could compile into
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. So
yeah, exactly.
But like
it's like hosted Snowpack install essentially.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. So then my question is, how does that work under the hood? Because are you bundling this sort of just in time as soon as the first request for a version comes in, and then you cache it, or like how do you? Because I'm just thinking like how many dependencies are there on npm that are front end related? Like there's probably like millions, right? And then each one of them has many different versions, and then every single day, millions of them are getting updated all the time.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that that scales basically? This is like a really now we're getting into the really nitty gritty, but that's just the first thing I thought of because
no, it's totally on demand. So we're not like trying to keep a mirror of npm or anything like that. Essentially, I think you can kind of see. I don't know how quick the stream is, but when I run this, you'll see a little reference to a URL here, cdn.pika.dev.
Yeah.
So that's that's essentially hosted JavaScript packages. So it works for all these packages. Yeah, similar to unpackaged, purely ESM. So there's no interface that isn't importing this as a dependency via ESM.
And then also, so when I'm loading this file now from, like in this example, Preact from the CDN, do I also get a single file like I would with Snowpack install?
Yeah. Yeah, so you can, actually here, let's see if this works. I think it will. I actually even think I have like a dynamic. Let's try this. So just like in the console using a so we got back these async functions from the async package. Essentially what that did is it loaded async. This is going to be a rabbit hole, so we don't have to go over all this, but essentially what it did is it resolved that /async, which could mean anything, to its latest package version and shipped that down to me as a single file.
Yeah, so Meulka rightfully sort of summarized, web dependencies are sort of an optimization to move this ahead of time bundling that you're doing in Snowpack install to the server, so that when you're running Snowpack install, you don't even have to bundle anything anymore. You're just installing a single file for every single dependency.
Yeah, it solves that, exactly. It solves that problem, so it makes it faster. And then it solves the problem of just like managing your dependencies in two places. This is still very experimental. So I'd say, again, this is like It's not on by default for anything. I think even this is probably going to go away for the 2.0 launch. So it's like this is a kind of next vision for at least where Snowpack can fit in, simplify things, and then also just be a part of your web development process.
Yeah, so then this sort of ties into the vision of making your development environment very quick, because at that point you're not even the install is quick, even though you're sort of installing bundles, right? Like single files for every dependency. It's still quick because that's done ahead of time on the server rather than on the client. So
yeah.
Your development environment is fast, your install environment is fast, and your build is just a normal bundler. So you're sort of making everything faster that matters.
Yeah. We're pulling all the work out of the dev environment as much as possible.
That's awesome. That makes a lot of sense to me. Very cool. Is there where can people find out more about this? Where can people find more about you? What should they do? What do you want people that are watching this to do with all of this information?
I want everyone to find as many bugs as possible. They exist. I don't want them to exist by the official launch next week. So please, like, play around with this, try it out. I would love any feedback. You can see it at snowpack.dev. I'm on Twitter at FredKShot. Pika, the Snowpack Pika, that whole project is at Pika Package at Twitter, which is where we post a lot of these updates, cool things that are being built with this. Yeah, play around with it. It's really exciting stuff.
I'm posting these links in chat. That's why I'm typing. Sorry.
Nice. No problem. How
rude. Go to these links if you want to follow Fred. Eden, I think, summed up this entire chat really well in one sentence in chat just now. He was like, this is really dope. This is the first time I'm really understanding what Snowpack does for me as a developer. And I feel the exact same way. I sort of didn't really know why I would want no bundler. And I was thinking that has some downsides. But really, using it for a much better development environment for us makes a ton of sense to me, right? And it's really the magic of imports makes that happen, and of your import rewriting and sort of dependency bundling. That combination just made a ton of sense. So thanks for coming on. Yeah. I looks like people learned something. If you learned something, definitely clap in chat or something, or tell us, because that's always useful to know. And then go follow Fred and use Snowpack V2 and tell him about all of the bugs. Spam his GitHub issue tracker.
All of them.
And
all
tell him about all of the bugs that he has. All of the bugs that he wrote.
Thanks for having me on. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to turn off the stream now. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. See you next time.